today we're joined by Dr. Vera, who is the Associate Dean of Postdoctoral Fellows in the Faculty of Graduate Studies and an Associate Professor in the Faculty of Pharmaceutical Studies. Along with being a recipient of the UBC Killam Award for Excellence in Mentorship and the Women's Health Research Institute Mentorship in Women's Health, Dr. Vera holds a Tier 2 Canada Research Chair in Health Outcomes and Treatment Adherence. And throughout her career, she has dedicated time to mentor the next generation of researchers and has led a number of initiatives to enhance the opportunities and environment for graduate students and postdocs. And now she is kindly taking the on some of her wisdom to us. So with that, I will leave it to Dr. Vera to take it from here.
Thank you, Nicole, and thank you for the invitation. And thank you all for joining, sharing the space on this not quite beautiful Wednesday afternoon. I think we have showers here and there. So I am just going to share my screen. So yeah, actually, when I go to a talk right around this time, I'm always just like thinking, or I guess I was thinking, you know, how could I make it so that it was worth the hour that you were going to spend with me? So I think it's going to be worth it because I think the topic that I'm talking about happens to be one of my favorite topics, which is mentorship and supervision. And then I also hope that we can try to make this as interactive as we can. So I will be inviting at some point for the talk to use the chat, and then throughout the talk, so I meant this to be a conversation, so please feel free to put up your hand, engage, ask me questions as I go along, and yeah, I really hope that you'll take some pearls or gems from this talk, and I think there's some instances where I might even be controversial. So I might try to challenge what you know, or some of those supervision and mentorship practices that you may have been exposed to. So I do also want to pause to acknowledge I am coming to you from my home, which is in Vancouver. I do the majority of my research on UBC's Point Grey campus. So this is all situated on traditional, ancestral, and unceded territories of the Musqueam, the Squamish, and the Tsleil-Waututh First Nations. So I want to share some disclosures. I actually don't have any, but the one disclosure that I do share, because I do touch upon it in my talk, is that I am someone with lived experience of cancer. So 2 years into my academic appointment, so I began at UBC in 2013. 3 years in, I was actually diagnosed with colorectal cancer. So a profound diagnosis at a time when I was trying to building a research career and also building up my supervision and mentorship. So it's hard to disentangle these experiences from the cancer experience. So, and the also thing that I'm sharing here is after I came back from medical leave, as an epidemiologist, I was inspired and motivated to merge the science that I know with to use it to study a disease that had profoundly impacted me and my family. So I like to call that I broke and entered into cancer research, and that is with support and encouragement by mentors that I found along the way. So I'll be touching on my experience as a mentee when I was trying to break and enter into a research area that wasn't mine. So I have a little bit of an outline of the talk. So I want to tell you about my people, or I might just be calling it colloquially my peeps, because that's what I do call them, my peeps. And then I hope that this is an invitation for you to reflect on who are your peeps. And I might be actually asking you about these peeps, and if you feel okay to share who your peeps are on the chat. And then I'm going to talk a little bit about mentoring, my experiences both as a mentor and as a mentee. And then I'm going to end with supervising. And this is where I'm going to share with you some of my tips and tricks. And I think, yeah, one of them is going to be the one that may be quite controversial. So when I think about mentorship and supervision, and both, I do think about my peeps. So these are my peeps. And when I say my people, these are the people that have had a hand in guiding my training and my career. And I'm going to draw some circles around my peeps. So some of these people were my supervisors, and I put on brackets underneath at what point of my training they had supervisory. They had a supervisor. They had a supervisory role with me. And then when you think about supervision, you know, you do think about the individual that does have a hand in your training. They have, for lack of a better word, like an authority, because they do have that that responsibility and also the capacity to provide an evaluation of the work that you're doing. They could also be disciplinary, and then ultimately they're also the ones guiding you through those processes to get you through that ultimate goal, which is either your master's degree, your PhD, or that completion of your postdoctoral fellowship. So these are the people that were my formal supervisors throughout my graduate training. And then I'm gonna draw another circle. So these are the people who are my mentors. So these are the people who I relied on and for guidance, for support, for advice. So not necessarily related to me in a formal capacity. So that's Dr. John Estelle, Dr. Larry Lynn, Dr. Stuart Peacock. So not my bosses, not my supervisors or anything, but truly some of the most important people in terms of the people that I will turn to if I needed advice or wisdom about something that I was doing. So I basically drew a Venn diagram here. And when I actually look at my people like this, it takes a little bit of pressure off me when I think about my role now as a supervisor and as a mentor. So I like to think that, you know, your supervisor doesn't have to be your mentor. And then at the same time, you can find a mentor anywhere. So, and then the last is, if you're lucky, you do get into a unicorn situation where your supervisor and your mentor are one and the same. But I think I think just, you know, just seeing it like this, to me, it takes a lot of pressure off that I don't have to be all of that for the people that I have an influence on in their careers. So I guess this is my first invitation for reflection and sharing. So I just want to invite you to think about who are your people and what does your Venn diagram look like? So I think this is like your homework. This is like a takeaway from this. We don't have to be drawing Venn diagrams right now. But I guess the one thing that I am curious about, because I feel like there are a lot out there, and I actually love, to be honest, in my role as Associate Dean, Graduate and Postdoctoral Fellows, one of the things that I do in my portfolio is handle complex cases. So that is one of the, I think, the challenges of the job is when I am pulled in to help mediate circumstances where there is conflict between a postdoctoral fellow and their supervisor. So actually, my way to kind of deal with with the challenges that is, I love it when people tell me how great as a relationship is. So I'm always asking people for their experiences, and then when I hear that a supervisor is doing this or that, I'm always like emailing that supervisor like, thank you, good job, and vice versa. So if I could invite you, and maybe we could use the chat on this, if you could share an important lesson that you learned from your mentor or your supervisor. And I guess maybe a short blurb on the chat. And as you're thinking and doing that, I'm going to share one important lesson that I learned from my mentor supervisor. And this was actually really hard because I've learned a lot of lessons from these people. But I picked this one. So, and I have evidence for this lesson. So this was a paper that we published during my PhD, and I was second author, and it was actually an invited review on gout and mortality, which is the area of work that my supervisor, Hyun, was working in. So he was invited to write this review. So it's like one of those guaranteed papers because he was invited by the journal. And then he invited me to write it. But the catch was he asked me, well, he didn't ask me. He told me that we were going to be working on a review with myself and a fellow, and that we were going to start this on Friday, and we needed to get the paper submitted on Monday. And we literally did write the paper over one weekend. I guess the lesson that I've taken from that is I can write a paper in one weekend. Like before that, it would be like, oh my gosh, it would take like forever and a day to write a paper. But that push, like that was, I think, the academic equivalent of being pushed off a boat and then just being expected to swim. And then luckily, I was able to swim. But because I knew that my supervisor was there. So I knew, and this was pre-cloud sharing, pre-Google Docs. So this was like email a document back and forth. This was like 2008. So I knew that like if I sent him an email, I would get feedback right away. So we literally co-wrote it over the weekend. So the lesson I took from that is that, I can do hard things. So actually I still draw on that when I'm having a hard time with, coming up with like this section of a grant, or I'm struggling with a paper. Because now I still take a while to write a paper, and then I go back to like, I can write a paper in one weekend. So I'm just looking to see how the chat is doing, if we have anything shared there. I think maybe you all are shy for now, maybe. But if a lesson comes to you, please feel free to put it on the chat, but we can keep going. Okay, so that was one lesson that I would like to share. And play from current slide. And then I also, so yesterday I was at the Faculty of Medicine peer mentorship closing celebration. So, aside from like people who are kind of more like, at a greater level than you, like a supervisory capacity or like a boss capacity, I also want to remind you that, your mentors are also your peers. So these are my peers. My mentor, who I mentor, and who mentored me, and vice versa. So we were all classmates during grad school at UBC, and I think fortunate enough to all be in academia together. And actually, I consider myself so lucky that when I go to my office at the Faculty of Pharmaceutical Sciences, Mosen's office is right beside mine. I hold an appointment at Arthritis Research Canada. So we have our office on Yukon and 7th. And when I go to that office, Antonio's office is right beside mine. We affectionately call ourselves the Cinco, because Antonio is Mexican, so he's always trying to teach us Spanish. So these are also like, people that I keep growing with in my career. So I guess one of the things that I hope that I will leave you here is, know your people, find your people, and just keep growing with your people. And these are really, not just colleagues. These are people that I will always call, or one of the first people that I will call, regardless of like what's happening in life. So, and I think, training and career is the best time to be finding the people that you'll grow with. So I guess that's also an invitation to see how that circle is for you. So I'm gonna shift now on mentoring. So as I talk about mentoring, I'm gonna keep drawing on the people that I showed you in those Venn diagrams. So the first thing is about finding and looking for a mentor. And this is something that I actually get asked about. And unfortunately, my answer to that is I don't really intentionally look for a mentor. I guess to me, those relationships that I talk about, or like the mentors that I showed, those are kind of mentorship relationships that just happened. It wasn't in a formal capacity. It was just a first connection that just grew. So I want to use an example of, I guess, my most recent mentor to illustrate that. So Dr. Stuart Peacock, he is a professor at SFU's Health Sciences. He is also a researcher at BC Cancer, very established and very well-known health services researcher in cancer. He's a health economist. So this was actually coming back from medical leave. So this was in 2017. I had just taken 2 years off because actually before I was diagnosed with cancer, I had a baby. So I was on maternity leave. And then I was 8 months into maternity leave when I was actually diagnosed with cancer. So then the cancer treatment added another year to that leave. So when I came back, I really was motivated to try to break and enter into cancer research. And my goal was at the time was actually to find collaborators. It wasn't even to find a mentor. I just wanted to connect with people who are doing health services research in cancer so that they could join me for a seed grant that I was writing. And then the connection was actually an email to request a meeting. It wasn't quite a cold call. And this is where I think using your people that you already have. So the connection that I had to Stuart was actually Helen, who is one of my peer mentors or one of the Syncos. She was actually working with him at BC Cancer. So I did ask Helen to poke him a little so that when my email landed on his desk, it wasn't a cold call email. So, but that was the first connection, and he was gracious enough to accept a meeting invite. This was pre-COVID, so this was an in-person meeting at BC Cancer, and I have to say that was an amazing meeting in terms of just the encouragement and the support that he gave me, because one of the hesitations I had about trying to do cancer research as someone who just had cancer is the perception of bias that I might have in my work, having experienced it myself. But then Stuart was just really great about how I might address that bias, work with patient research partners, and just giving me advice on, yes, you are motivated and inspired because of your experience, but just to always remember your role in this research. You are the researcher, so stay a researcher. So working with Stuart has also been great because he's my checker in terms of like when I have a question or when I bring up an issue, when I'm kind of straddling into patient language, he's the one who always makes sure that I pull back and remain in my researcher epidemiologist hat. So over the time since that first meeting, we've actually grown research collaboration. So I've invited him to grants. We've co-authored papers, and then he's also done the same when he had a big team grant and he invited me as a co-investigator. And I think that collaboration is what then evolved into a mentorship relationship. So now he's become like my go-to person for advice on all things cancer research. I'm actually at a fork in my career where I'm about to go up for promotion to full professor, and I actually just sent him an email for his advice on how I'm going to navigate that and how to keep growing the cancer research. So I guess all that to say is, when I first reached out to Stuart, I wasn't looking for a mentor, but then just through relationship building and just keeping that connection, that collaboration turned into a mentorship. So I guess this is, for you to, find those mentors because you never know where they will be. Okay, I'm just making sure that we are good for time. And then I guess I will invite you, if there's any questions, again, please feel free to interrupt me at any time. I hope that it's not just me doing all the talking, but I have lots of stories, so I'm happy to keep talking too, but please feel free to ask questions as I go along. Okay, so that is finding a mentor. So now let's talk about becoming a mentor. And this one, we're gonna throw it back all the way to kindergarten. So this when you're a mentor, how I approach mentorship is basically treating others the way you want to be treated. So it really is some of the first lessons we learned at school. And I actually really like that. And I can't help but think about Carlo Mara, who was one of my unicorns. So this was my postdoc supervisor, who also became my mentor. So I remember when we would talk things about life, or when it is like, when the conversation is a life issue or like a career trajectory. I remember I was interviewing for positions at University of Calgary at the time. He would always tell me like that the advice he would give to me is the advice he would, it's what he would do for himself. So that whole notion of just reflecting, self-reflection, and then just being to others as how you would be for yourself. So this is basically my approach to being a mentor. It's kindness, treating others the way I want to be treated. And actually, the other thing is seeing the person at your level. So I think something that kind of gets taken away with mentorship is like, there's also a friendship that forms. So while, my trainees are my trainees, if I also happen to be the mentor, I actually am a friend. So there's that, the power balance kind of goes away. It becomes a challenge, so you do have to navigate it. But again, I think the biggest principle here is just being kind, and that's treating others the way you want to be treated. And I will always hear Carlo saying into my head, I'm giving you this advice because this is what I would do. And I think if you're all in the position to mentor, and if you have that opportunity to give someone an advice, what would be the advice to yourself, or what would you do? And I think maybe I'll invite you to that for your mentee who might be in front of you asking for what to do with their life. And then the other thing about mentorship is paying it forward. So I really love this quote from Maya Angelou. People will forget what you said, people will forget what you did, but people will never forget how you made them feel. So I think with academia, we get so caught up with like papers and grants and like how do we quantify things. And I think it all again goes back to kindness, and really like it's those little, it may seem little to you, but but it's those memories that are lasting, that will stay with a person. And I will illustrate this with an example. It's hard for me to, I guess, to really put words to it, because whenever I think about it, it's still very special to me. So I'm gonna go now to Dr. Larry Lin, who is one of my mentors. Still, all of these people that I talk about are still my mentors. I think that's the one great thing about mentors. It's like, it's a lifelong relationship. So I am so lucky that I think I could text. I think I have all of the cell phone numbers except for Carlo. I can text them, and I think they will respond, and I can call them and they will be there for me. So I'm gonna talk about Dr. Larry Lin. So Dr. Lin became my mentor when I started an assistant professor in the Faculty of Pharmaceutical Sciences. Again, it was an organic relationship. He was associate director of our research unit at the time. And then it was just a lot of, his office is on the way to the water cooler. So then, and he had an open door policy. So then whenever I would get water or whenever I would heat up my lunch, because his office was open, it was just so easy to pop my head, to say hi. And then, you pop your head once, if I happen to have an advice needed, or even like, where to find this in the faculty. So over the years of just asking questions, he just became my natural mentor. One of the lasting things about him is actually how he really, the way he made you feel, because he just really made you feel like so special. So when I was going through chemotherapy, I still remember this. So he has a lot of international collaborations in Rwanda. So I remember one morning when he was flying off to Rwanda, but then he insisted on dropping off meals, because we had a meal train going for my family because I had two young kids at the time. So he insisted on dropping off macaroni and cheese, which my daughters love because he makes the best mac and cheese. And I was like, no, Uncle Larry, I call him Uncle Larry. No, Uncle Larry, you're going to Africa. You don't have to worry about it. But then it's like, no, I'm dropping it off. So again, it's how he made you feel at the time. So I actually I wanted to say thank you, because how do you say thank you for some things that are just so ungraspable? So there is the John McNeil Excellence in Health Research Mentorship Award, which is a prestigious award that honors outstanding mentors at UBC. And I said, oh, Uncle Larry, let's nominate you. So this was actually an excerpt from the letter of nomination that I wrote for him for the 2021, for the award that he received in 2022. And bless him, this is a picture from the award ceremony where he took me as his date. So the story that I told you was what I wrote on my letter of support and nomination. So I did talk about what an excellent researcher he was. I did talk about the dozens and hundreds of mentees that he had and all the graduate students that he had supervised, and then all of the faculty and all of the trainees that he had mentored, including myself. But this was the one thing that I wanted the committee to remember, is that humanness of him, and yeah, how he made me feel when he really showed his support by insisting to drop off that macaroni and cheese despite being on his way to Rwanda. So so I think, yeah, mentorship is really paying it forward. And then I guess as a mentee, it's saying thank you, although you know that they do it and they don't need you to thank them. But I think it's nice to be able to say thank you. I've been on the receiving end of that thank you. So I had the opportunity to receive a mentorship award, and it is because the people that you see here pictured, I'm going to talk about what they're holding in their hands later on, because they said thank you, although they didn't need to. Again, I think I do what I do for them, not needing a thank you, but they felt compelled to say thank you. So they actually assembled. So Nicole was my first PhD student, so she assembled her little siblings, and they all wrote the nomination and the letters of support. And I've actually had the chance to read some of their letters of support, and wow, that is really touching. So, and I guess mentorship is also circle of life. So that what goes around comes around. So all to say, I guess last few thoughts on mentorship. I guess maybe in my storytelling, I feel like maybe now you can really see how it is really, when I say it's the joy, it really is the joy of my job. And it's the easiest part, because it really is about building and nurturing relationships. It's not writing a grant, it's not writing a paper, it's not doing an experiment. It's just that human connection. And I guess when we think about how hard academia is and how demanding our jobs are, it's nice that this one component could just bring so much joy. So yeah, I guess this is an invitation to be a mentor, be a good mentor, and also be a good mentee, and keep those relationships going. And let's keep that epidemic of kindness in academia. And I feel like it will really lift all of us if we are good mentors and good mentees. So that is, I guess, my stories on mentorship. So I'm gonna do a pause now just to see if there's any questions, or I'm gonna take a quick check of the chat if anything popped up on a lesson that was learned.
I'm actually curious about just being someone who has received this recognition from your mentees. What is it about your style or relationships you had with them that sort of recognition? Why is it that you were nominated?
Yeah, I mean, I asked myself that, but honestly, it really is one of those things, you do it, you you don't expect anything, but I go back to how I was treated. So I've just been really lucky that I've had like, you know, a Carlo that would tell me, yeah, I will give you advice that I would do for myself. So I guess that's how I kind of mentored. So one of the people that nominated me, Alisa, she had a baby during her PhD. So then I guess I was able to like kind of give her the same kind of wisdom that Carlo had given me, like, you know, this is what I would do because I know what it's like to be, you know, a mother, a woman in academia navigating it. So I think that was the flavor of like the letters, is just, yeah, being, giving just genuine advice that I would have also given myself. And I think the other thing that maybe I'm trying to remember the letters is, being the cheerleader. I think one of the cool things about Ali's letter is I think when she was getting her master's, she was also my master's student. I happened to have photobombed her because I was on the stage, and her picture where she was getting her diploma, I was in the background cheering, and then she wrote in that letter that like this picture could not have been more opportune because this is what Mary is. She's like the cheerleader for us. It's like if we get a rejection, she'll celebrate us and she'll tell us, you know, let's go feel it. But then we're gonna get up and we're gonna try again. And then when we get a paper, you know, we would go for ice cream. So, and I think that was yeah, I think those are some of the elements that I think that they will tell you. Yeah. So maybe we'll move on to supervision. And again, this is the part where I have some of my tips might be controversial. So now for supervision. So on supervising. So some of these are secrets. I can't believe I'm telling people, but it's okay. People know it because they've had to do it. So I'm going to tell you some secrets, and not so secrets, and I'm going to break it down. And again, these are like really like, these are not mind bending, and these are just like a couple of nuggets. So some secrets around recruitment, and I have this thing called my egg test, and I think my credibility is about to like just all fall down to the toilet after I tell you my egg test, but that's okay. I feel like this is a safe space. I'm gonna tell you just I think what works for me during training, as they're progressing through training, and then at the finish, and I have this thing called my hashtag PhDoll. So at recruitment, oh, sorry, that was a double slide. So at recruitment, so I think hopefully this might be helpful for those who are early career researchers, or those you know, postdocs finishing up and thinking about, okay, when you're building your lab, because there's so much happening, you're trying to get your first grad, you know, how are you going to recruit your first graduate student? So one thing that worked for me is, again, going back to my people, using my peeps for my recruitment. So my first graduate student, he is now so he started in 2014. He has since finished his master's and then went on to medical school. So he's now a family doctor in Toronto. So Dr. Pavan Meha was my first graduate student. So I didn't actually recruit him because he had reached out to Dr. John Estelle. So Dr. John Estelle is one of my mentors that I talked about. And he is you know, a very well-established clinician scientist, gets so many emails from trainees wanting to do graduate training or a fellowship project. So, and because John has trained so many people, he has an eye for CVs. So I think when he sees a CV or an email that he is compelled to open, he actually will circulate it to his scientists. So he was at the time the scientific director of Arthritis Research Canada. So I actually got connected to Pavan because he had emailed John as a prospective student, but then John didn't have capacity. But then John sent us the CV. So there were two of us who were new scientists at the time, and basically John said, you know, if I had the bandwidth, I would take the student. And because again, I had seen John mentor and supervise successfully, so I'm like, okay, if he sees something in this student, then it must be good. So, but I still did do like, the interview and just getting to know Pavan. But I think just having that John check was really something that really worked. And actually now that's something that I do, because I think now I don't quite yet have like the Jedi level that John has when he sees a CV and he knows whether, or he has that feeling that this is going to be a good student. But I think I have now trained enough and I've seen enough CVs, I've sat on enough admission committees that I do have a sense of good packages. So now I do that for new colleagues in my faculty that I don't have a capacity, but this looks like a great student. I would recommend that you connect with them and see if there could be a potential for your lab. So yeah, use your peeps, because they are a great recruitment support. And then the other thing is then keep using your peeps to help you train that student. So the committee members for Pavan was then John. So then even though Pavan didn't get to work directly with John, he still worked with him indirectly as a committee member. And then Antonio, who again, I'll go back, was one of my peer peeps. And then Mike Law is actually another professor at School of Population Public Health that is a great collaborator of mine. So really filled the committee with people that I've seen supervise, and I know that they could mentor me in my supervision. So yeah, so I know recruitment is hard, especially when you're not as well established as an ECR, but this is an opportunity to use your network, your peeps, to support that recruitment, because that has really worked for me when I was an early career researcher. The other tip, so I don't know here, and this one where I might ask for hands. Has anyone seen this movie? It's called The 100-Foot Journey. Anyone? No? Okay. It came out in 2014, so it's not that old. And it's funny, because I was looking up when it came up, because I was wondering why this movie inspired my egg test, which is what I use when I'm recruiting someone when it's a cold call. So I'm going to tell you a little bit about this movie. So it came out to 2014. So I was like 1 year into my being an assistant professor. So this movie was about this family from India that had moved to France, and the son, so this guy right here, he dreamt of cooking in a Michelin restaurant. So they had an Indian restaurant, and then across the street there was this French Michelin restaurant, and the restaurateur is the character played by Helen Mirren. So Helen Mirren, her character, she had this test where if she ate somebody's omelette, she would know whether they would be Michelin quality chef. So there is one scene in this movie where the young Michelin dreamer cooked an omelette for Helen Mirren, and when she tasted it, she knew that he was gonna be a Michelin worthy chef. And then the movie progressed and he did become a Michelin chef. So I was watching that scene and I was like, aha, I need myself an egg test. So what is it that I could ask someone who's coming to my email, because they're not coming through the door, who wants to be my graduate trainee? What kind of test could I give them that I could tell whether they're going to be a great student or a student that I would want to take? So then I went back to Hyun Choi, who was my PhD supervisor. And one of the things that Hyun always said, it's funny, sorry, I'm distracting my own self, but it's funny. I guess if you're thinking about your mentors or supervisors, I wonder if they have catchphrases that you will never forget. Because, I was telling you about Carlos' catchphrase about advice for me is something you do for myself. Hyun's thing that he always said was, to be a good scientist, you have to be a good writer. So my PhD, he spent a lot of time on my writing. And then he would add, to be a good writer, you have to be a good reader. So that we were also doing a lot of reading together. But I always go back to Hyun saying, yeah, to be a good scientist, you have to be a good writer. So actually one of the things that I look for when I am recruiting is their writing ability. And I know that people will ask for writing samples, but I go a bit more extra. So my egg test is, I actually, and this is where the controversy lies, So I actually asked the person to write a reference letter, and I will point them to either the CHR instructions or the Michael Smith instructions or whatever scholarship that they might be qualified for. And I asked them to write a reference letter. So this is where the controversy lies, is, I am of the philosophy that the student write the letter and I will zhuzh it up and I will sign it. I know there are others that will write the letter themselves, but I, for bandwidth, for time, and again, because of my egg test, I get the students to write the reference letters and then I sign them. So in my egg test, I will be able to assess, their ability to follow instructions, because I send them instructions that they will see from the granting agency or the funding agency. And then I see their ability to write de novo, not like a paper that they wrote or not like a project that they wrote. And actually, it's a test that has served me really well, because if they do pass the egg test, then they already have a reference letter that then we get to spice up for applications. So it's kind of like a test that keeps giving. So yeah, I think when I share people this egg test, I get a lot of varying feedback. Some of them is like, oh, that's genius. And I get the, oh my God, like is that right to make them do that? Like, yes, it is. So anyway, there's an egg test. Please watch the movie. Please think about that scene. And yeah, maybe you might have a future egg test to support your recruitment. And then I guess the other thing that I kind of hold on to during training is just like it's the 2 C's for me, and it's regular check-ins and communication. For my check-ins, I actually have standing meetings with all my trainees, and that happens every Thursday, and they are 45 minutes. They are on the calendar. They're on the calendar. If we use it up, good. If we don't, then we have minutes to ourselves. But it is just nice to just get it on the book so that they're coming up, and then it keeps you on track and it keeps me on track. And then I think the other thing about check-ins, it's also a way for me to gauge my capacity. So if I have like a day if my Thursday that starts at 9 and ends at 5 cannot fit any more check-ins, then I know that I can't take on a student until someone vacates a check-in time. Because I think that's something that we also need to think about is capacity. So I have a very hands-on supervisory approach, and that I do need to check in and make sure that I'm involved throughout their training. So if I don't have check-in capacity, that's when I know that I'm not taking any students in. So I guess it's a 2-for-1 what the check-ins could do. And then the other thing is communication. And I think just knowing how to communicate and just setting those boundaries. So with my trainees, we actually communicate by text, because the email has become so overwhelming. So for them, the easiest way for us to reach each other is by text message. But that's something that we established very early on. Because if text message wasn't going to work for them, then okay, then it's email, or how are we going to work around email mounted. So those are 2 things that I've just I guess the non-negotiables for me. And just it seems really basic, but that's actually how I've been able to like maintain just the capacity to be able to train what I think are successful trainees, because I think all of my trainees today, we've been really successful in getting CHR at all levels. And when they graduate, at least for PhD, we have, at least 3 peer-reviewed publications. For a master's, at least 2. So, and I think it goes back to just being hands-on, doing these check-ins, and the communication piece. And just the last thing at the finish, which also serves full circle back into recruitment. So at the finish, I'm big on celebration, and I'm going to tell a story that happened with Nicole. So I think we were having a meeting with our statistician once, and I think she had just seen on Twitter that I think somewhere in Europe, was it Finland? when you graduate from your PhD, you get a sword. I don't know if anybody here can validate that, but she then was like, she was saying it jokingly, but she was like, you know, in Finland, when you graduate, you get a sword. Here, what do you get? You just get a piece of paper. And then I was like, maybe we can make something for, you know, maybe we can prove Nicole wrong. So it started out as just like almost like as a joke. So I I grew up in the Philippines. I love making toys because we didn't have much. So I was making my own toys. And so I was inspired from Nicole complaining that she doesn't get anything but a piece of paper to make a doll for her. So this was when I was, you know, this was pre-tenure. So I found like this old UBC stand from Salvation Army. It was like $2. I have a label maker. Um, this was a dollar store doll. So if you actually lift this regalia, there's nothing. It's just a head that I stuck on a straw. So you can actually see the straw. But then I hand sewed and hot glue gun UBC PhD regalia. So this is Nicole holding her PH doll. Fast forward, it was such a hit that then I was like, oh shoot, like they wouldn't let me live it down. That the next people that were graduating, they're like, we need to have a doll too. Why does Nicole get a doll? Because she complained. So then a tradition was born, and Sharzad was the next one to graduate. And by this time, COVID had happened. We were all looking for hobbies, so I learned how to sew on a sewing machine. I also got tenure, so then it's no longer a dollar store doll. It's now a Barbie doll that I buy at Toys R Us. And this is the second edition. So these are extremely limited edition dolls that they get when they graduate. And just last May, the most recent one just walked the stage. So this is Alisa with her PH doll. So Ali had a baby during her PhD. So as I get as they grow, they keep getting better, these dolls, because I get better at making them, and then they get even more personalized. So Ali had a baby during her PhD. So then I found a little girl that looked like her daughter, and she also had a golden retriever, Charlie. So I found a Charlie doll. So and it goes back to recruitment, because so now when I'm actually recruiting or thinking about whether I'm going to accept a PhD student, because these dolls are only available if you finish a PhD with me. I actually, when I'm interviewing the person, I am already thinking like 4 or 5 years from now, how am I gonna feel sewing and hot glue gunning, because the cat is a hot glue gun and I'm burning myself, making these dolls, making this doll. Like, could I see myself making a doll for this person? So yeah, it's actually also become a really great tool to support my recruitment, because if I can't answer yes to that question of whether I can make them a doll, then I probably won't be taking them as a PhD student. So and this is kind of like the process that happens. I think this is yeah, I take pictures because I never write down the steps and I always forget how to make it. So it's always like starting from the beginning. So yeah, and that's the process of making a hat. So yeah, it truly is joy. So I actually have a number of these dolls that I'm gonna have to make over the next several years, because I have right now 4 PhD students. So there's gonna be a lot of these dolls coming, and they did all pass the will I make it for them 4 years from now. Some of them did have to pass the egg test. So a little bit unconventional, but they've worked for me. So I guess this is also the invitation to find the joy, and I guess find the things that will work for you. So I guess it is a lot of work, but with the right team and the right students, it really is, I think, one of like the best parts of academia. So yeah, and if you like making dolls, I recommend getting into the PH doll business. So yeah, so I mean, I would share slides, but there's not much to my slides. There's just pictures. So yeah, happy to take comments or questions.
Yeah, I guess I have a question
Sure.
about supervision, I guess.
Yeah.
When you have a new trainee coming into your lab, do you have a process for sort of formally setting expectations with each other, like kind of before you get started?
Yes, we do. So we actually have so there's template letters from GNPS that support that, but our faculty also has, and it's actually a letter that we sign, and it's kind of like a fill in the blanks letter. Like, this is the frequency of the meeting, this is how you're going to be communicating, and this is the what you should expect in terms of like turning around documents, what's my turnaround. And then within my own lab, I actually have like a lab manual that then I send them. So then, and then it has just the guidance on how we, where we save our files. So we were working with patient files. So making sure that you're working on the UBC drives, you're not putting anything in your, personal devices. And then how you save the files. Again, often we're writing papers collaboratively. So file naming conventions becomes really important, especially when I'm looking at all these files. And I actually, before I was in academia, I was working in a private corporation. So actually, I would always tell my students that, like, yeah, it seems nitpicky to have to name your file a certain way, but actually some companies, it's tied to your performance. They will be seeing how you name your files. So so this is actually, and I actually say a lot of this even before we formalize it, because I really want them to know what they're getting into. So I guess also the conversation then is also like stipends and what I'll be committing to. So and it, yeah, that expectation setting so important from the beginning. And then checking along the way, right? Because then expectations will change as you progress. So because yeah, so I think so the letter that we have, like, again, my faculty supports it because they want to make sure that we're always on top. It also kind of adapts to like year 1, year 2, year 3. Yeah, and I believe GNPS, we have templates for this if your units don't have one. And for us, we actually have to submit this letter to our graduate program manager. So we have to show that we read it, we signed it, and we submit it, and they have it on file.
Could you tell us about, I guess, the most challenging relationship you've had and how you kind of resolve things?
Yeah. So I think just some of the challenges happened during COVID. I think when it was just so easy when you would see each other in person, then you can kind of have like a feel of how people are doing. I think when we all had to be at home, it was harder to gauge how people were doing, how people were navigating the pandemic. So yeah, I think I did experience like some disengagement with some people from my team. And I think with that, it goes back to this communication and but having those hard conversations, like, are you okay? Tell me, what's going on? Like, how can I help? Knowing that like you might not be able to help, but then I think just doing that check-in, like, who do you have supporting you? And pointing them, like, and I guess if they are open to help, it's like, okay, here's what's available, like, or here's some numbers, or here's a therapist that I'm working with. So I think the other thing too that I think I've learned with COVID, and I think just as we are all just becoming more comfortable with I think just speaking, just like, just talking about like hard topics that we don't normally talk about, like, and I guess this is great that this is the Institute of Mental Health. So I think that's something that I openly share with my trainees, is like my own like need to take care of my mental health. So they know that like I work with like a counselor, and then so I think when again, when you mirror that, when they feel that it's safe, that they can share that they're struggling, and because I'll be like, oh, this is what my therapist told me. So I think that is also an invitation for taking care of themselves. But I know that's not easy. And, I mean, I also am someone that had, a below the waist cancer. So I think I also learned how to like, talk about things that are not openly talked about. And I think maybe that's where, my comfort with talking mental health came about. But I know that like, I think my trainees really appreciate that, they can tell me that, oh, they're struggling because they know that like, okay, I get it, or like, oh yeah, I talked about that to my class, the therapist last week. So yeah.
Yeah, I mean, you've obviously been very successful, very understanding mentor and supervisor. I was just thinking about, you were saying that you also look at like a lot of the conflicts and the complaints that come through.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
What would you say is the most common problem that arises?
You know what? I think it's expectations not being met. I think regardless of like the I guess what the actual detail is, it is, I think, postdoc had an expectation that was not met, or this PI had an expectation that wasn't met, and then I think that it's just coming to an head. And I mean, I think I got wiser. I mean, I like to think that, like, I guess maybe me go to therapy also helped with my mediation of these complex cases. But yeah, it really boiled down to like unmet expectations, which then goes back to, had this been talked about from the beginning, none of these would have happened. But then again, these are some things that maybe we're not routinely used to, or there's practices that, yeah, I think these expectation setting, I think some units do it better, some people do it better, but then I don't know if that is standard across, right? Because I guess in academia there's also like so much power dynamics at play. So yeah, but yeah, in the end, I think it's unmet expectations.